Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Lex Poll webinar, The Path to Drone as First Responder, Scaling Drone Programs for Public Safety Agencies. We're going to be getting started in just a moment or so here. We'd like to thank our sponsor for today's event, Skydio and Axon. We've been working very closely with them for this webinar, so we appreciate them being here with us today. Okay, we've got a really great panel here joining us this morning for today's webinar. Vern Sallee served with the Chula Vista Police Department for 25 years before retiring as the patrol operation captain. At CVPD, he led the establishment and expansion of the department's drone program, known for its groundbreaking Drone as First Responder, or DFR, program, with over 9,800 flights in support of first responders. He has served as an expert for numerous UAS panels and presentations, including with the FAA and US DOJ, and within the UAS industry and public safety sectors. He now works for Axon as the lead strategist for Axon Air, the company's UAS division. Fritz Reber is the head of public safety integration at Skydio. Before Skydio, Fritz was the UAS commander with the Chula Vista Police Department. He retired after 27 years as a patrol captain in 2018. While at CVPD, he developed and worked to implement the Drone as First Responder program and Live 9/11. He authored the agency's concept of operations for the IPP submission and co-authored the safety case for the CVPD BVLOS waiver, as well as the recent tactical BVLOS waiver. Noreen Charlton is the senior manager of public safety strategy at Skydio. For more than a decade, she worked in the crime scene investigation section of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in Las Vegas, Nevada. Throughout her time in the field, she responded to nearly 4,000 scenes, including the Route 91 Harvest Festival mass casualty shooting. For several years, she has focused on the instruction and implementation of 3D technologies for public safety applications and has assisted with the documentation and forensic analysis of many high-profile cases. As a member of the crime scene investigations body of the American Academy of Forensic Science Standards Board, she actively contributes to the development and advancement of industry standards in crime scene investigations. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over here to our panel, Vern, Fritz, and Noreen. Welcome.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate you kicking us off here.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to everyone else for hanging out with us for a bit. So as we move on to our first slide, we wanted to kick off this webinar with an illustration of the ultimate vision of Drone as First Responder. There are somewhere around 16 agencies in the US that have implemented a DFR program to some extent, but typically this consists of personnel acting as docs on rooftops of a station or a police headquarters. And while this works with some agencies now, it is extremely restricted by environment and weather conditions, and it's really difficult to scale. The ultimate vision is for DFR to be doc-based and to have these docs pre-positioned throughout a jurisdiction. They may not necessarily cover the entire area, but they will cover the areas where the majority of your crime occurs. This will allow for the rapid response of drones to arrive before ground units. And the idea here is to automate as much as possible by integrating with third-party applications that you are already using. In this particular image, you can see that we have docs pre-positioned throughout this area and multiple drones responding to different areas prior to ground units for increased intelligence. Also, now is a good place to point to fire. Really want to make sure that we're not limiting our DFR conversations to policing only. When I think of any call that requires a significant response, police and fire are typically responding to the same scenes, but often they're operating off of different call taking systems or CAD information. And when police and fire can operate off of the same drone streams, everyone's receiving the most up-to-date information prior to arrival without adding that game of telephone into the mix. Today, we're super fortunate to be joined by two people who have had a significant impact in developing the concept of Drone as First Responder. Fritz and Vern, I'll throw the next couple of slides off to you.
Thanks, Noreen. I'm glad you mentioned fire too. Vern, we got to remember to talk more about that. We tend to be police centric. And are you going to go to the next slide, or we could talk here? I think. Vern and I have done a bunch of webinars on the history of DFR. It's important to go over it real quickly just to kind of set up the discussion. And it was definitely a tag team effort between myself and Bern and other leadership, of course, Roxana Kennedy and others at the Chula Vista Police Department. And like Noreen said, it's pretty well understood and starting to expand in dozens of agencies now. But it kind of started not really as a drone project. Bern started the drone program itself and then handed it over to me. And then we had an incident where we were trying to get unmarked units on scene and kind of get intelligence before going in. Without going into too much of that incident, we realized that policing is just sort of responding call to call to call. There wasn't a lot of problem solving, a lot of scouting beforehand. And so we tried to do this with plain clothes unit. And then when we, came across a remote operations technology, Cape Termas and I, he was a vendor for a company that enabled that, and we really said, hey, this will enable a drone to get there ahead of ground units. And that's kind of what started it. So it started as an idea. We drafted up a ConOps. It got selected for the IPP. And then when I retired and I came back to work for Bern, and basically we tag teamed and developed DFR. And it is what most people understand today. It's basically pre-positioned drones ready for immediate deployment, with the idea to get the drone there first on scene. And the secret sauce is the DFR pilot to have that person, arrive first on scene from a position of safety before ground units, with the knowledge to be able to manage the incident, maybe call it off the incident. 25% of the incidents, the police ground units aren't needed, they call it off. And so it's a really, obviously drones are an important component, and Vern and I work for companies that support drones, but it was also how drones are deployed. And I'm excited to have a conversation on methods of deployment, because I really think that's the part that makes drones transformational and ubiquitous. Vern?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would just, like to add, for sure, Fritz and his leadership, along with Chief Kennedy, were really instrumental. But, it is an evolving, area of police aviation, right? So, we never pretend like, what we developed at Chula Vista 5 years ago should be the end state, right? And I think today's webinar is going to talk about that. Is Chula Vista was a unique use case in many ways, weather-wise, topography, our community, suburban, things like that. But I think some of today's discussion is going to open that up to not just traditional DFR concepts, but field deployed DFR, which is has tremendous promise as well.
Go to the next slide. So I'll tee this up and hand it over to Vern, because he really did basically wrote the book on how to start a drone program. I don't know if it was wittingly or unwittingly, but it was the key to our success in terms of getting the community to accept something that was a very unique, advanced use case, not done anywhere else on the planet frequently. And that's one of the, frankly, and that's one of the questions we get, is how did you get the community to accept this? And what tools did you put in place? What outreach did you do to make this a possibility? And the 5 C's, in partnership with drone responders, that really kind of came from watching what Vern and others did, and pulled out those elements and identified them as 5 different components of building a sustainable and accepted drone program, one that the community accepts, one with buy-in. Vern?
Yeah, and I mean, it actually was a really thought out process, and I do give a lot of credit to California Command College, which Fritz and I had both attended, which is a futures-based course for senior leaders, and it basically helps you imagine what the future will be, and then do a really careful analysis. And so in 2015, a SWAT commander came to me and said, hey, I want to implement drones for SWAT, and I was the police technology captain. Didn't know anything really about drones. I'm not a hobbyist, but I am a police technologist, and so I started really scanning the landscape. And first the first things you started to see in 2015 was police departments and sheriff's departments that had started drone programs that were pretty rapidly shut down by the community because they viewed them as intrusive, they viewed them as surveillance and spy drones, things like that. So I realized, the most important thing is to engage with the community first. So we took the tack of forming, a multidisciplinary drone program working group before we ever bought a drone, did our research, looked at best practices, looked at policies, looked at successes and failures, and then started engaging with our communities, our elected officials. We would bring in the media and show them or talk to them about drones and the potential for them. And so we really did take that careful step. We created a website that had all of our policies and procedures, all of our drone flight maps, telling the story. And I guess, two themes that I always say is, first is there's nothing about a police drone program that should be secret except for the evidence, right? Just like the body cams, you hold evidence very close to for the integrity of your case. And then the other part of it is essentially making sure that you are telling your story forthrightly and as transparently as possible. If you're not telling your story of what you're using your drones for, somebody else who does not have your interest in mind is going to be telling a story that's detrimental to your program. So get out that story of drones for good, because they really are amazing tools.
Yeah, and this is the obvious first step in scaling up any kind of drone program, is doing this early, doing it quickly, and it's a never-ending process. If you go to Tulissa's website, other websites of DFR programs, there'll be transparency tools where they're putting up yesterday's flights, letting people know what a drone flew to, and why it flew, when it flew. Obviously, like Bern said, having a well-written, established policy, posting that policy. It's transparency and continued access and accountability. The community's got to feel like they have a say in it. We'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, I'll take the next couple here and we'll just have a conversation as we go along. So as we work toward this path of DFR, we'll just start with stage one, which we are calling specialized units. And at the most basic level, we're finding that agencies are incorporating specialized drone units. These may be for search and rescue or specific to a team like SWAT or a major traffic collision, but they're typically personnel that are specially trained in some aspect of the job, and then they are trained to be a pilot to capture data for that one specific job. And most often, we are seeing that with crash and crime scene units. And in these instances, the drone pilots are being requested after a situation has occurred, and often these drones are kind of kept on the shelves in an office or a station. These units are arriving at a scene, and then they have an intention of only searching or documenting at that scene, and they're often doing that in conjunction with other traditional methods. Many agencies that are using drones for policing name the primary missions of their UAS program as search and rescue, crash reconstruction, and crime scene documentation. In the illustration on the next slide, you will see it as both a crash and crime scene. So what we're seeing here is that an officer or a member of that team will arrive on the scene, deploy the drone from their vehicle, and then operate it from the controller for documentation purposes. Many agencies today are incorporating drones into their current documentation workflow, and they're reporting on time savings compared to their traditional methods, whether that's hand measurements or total stations or laser scanners. And we're finding that on average, drones are 75% faster. And then next along the path to DFR, on the next slide, we have patrol-led deployment, which is a method that is most commonly associated with the Oklahoma City Police Department. Patrol-led deployments are moving the drones from the shelves in that station or that office to the patrol vehicle. And ideally, these drones are being kept in the vehicles of units that will be first to respond to a scene. So an officer is dispatched to a call, they get in the general area, they remove the drone from their vehicle. And once deployed, they remain with that controller and communicate all of that aerial intelligence to both units on the ground as well as through dispatch. And then any necessary stakeholders, such as command staff, can view the live stream from any browser in any location and provide additional communication or guidance. While this is a great method to begin to use drones if you're not using it for a specialized unit or you're trying to move it into patrol, it's definitely limiting. With decreased staffing, you're now eliminating essentially another ground unit by ensuring that they are there controlling the drone. So this is a great place to start building out your ConUps, write your policies and procedures, engage in a partnership with the community for transparency, and help build trust in what you're doing with this technology. So showing some success stories with it along the way. And on the next slide, you'll see demonstrated in this graphic, this is patrol-led deployment. You have the officer controlling the drone near the patrol vehicle, and then they can broadcast that information via radios to dispatch as well as other officers on the ground. In this particular illustration, you're seeing that it has increased situational awareness because it allows the officer to be about a block away, but have eyes on the subjects at the corner of the building there, the right side of my image, who are beyond line of sight of the officers responding near the top left of the image. Any notes you guys want to add about patrol-led deployments that have been kind of most commonly used up until now?
Well, I think the big call out from the beginning was, and the setup was DFR, right? How you deploy a drone is transformational. If you deploy it differently, you get a different result. And that's what DFR showed, is a one unique way to get drones there ahead of ground units. And that was a value add that no one really thought of. And as we're talking about specialized units versus patrol-led deployment, I'm sure a lot of listeners are going to say, well, that's nothing new there. But the new part about it is calling it out and distinguishing that each other. Like everyone used to refer it to as drone in a trunk, but no one really kind of intentionally distinguished those and identified them so that they could be repeated. That's the value of a science, is identifying something and naming it and letting people intentionally do that. And that's what OKC did. Captain Bussert said, I understand the value of having drones in specialized units. We do that, but I also want them to be first on scene. I want them up in the air in the first minutes. I want them streaming. So what does a deployment method look like to do that? And now I don't give them to the people who are interested in flying drones or people with specialized skill sets or ability to train, which often a new drone, an agency that's starting up a new drone program will give them with the bomb unit or the tactical team because they have time to train on these specialized drones, which is true. But then you get the delayed response, like we learned with SWAT. And so you have to move these tools to the front line, which means you have to put the tools in the hands of your everyday officer. Obviously you want easy to fly drones. The learning curve has to be short. And Vern can talk about Axon, how they made body-worn cameras simple to use and easy to use. And that's the idea, is getting people to think, okay, I'm starting a drone program. I want drones in a trunk. How do I want that deployed? Do I want them based on where the officer and when the officer is working and not necessarily who might be interested or skilled? Or do I want it in a specialized unit, which I'll get, more advanced capabilities, more maybe indoor or drop kits or all these other kind of very specialized units, but a delayed response. And obviously the ideal thing is to have both. And so that's kind of the idea, is just in discussing the deployment methods and understanding what you're talking about, using common terms and getting people to make intentional decisions and standing up their programs to get these, get the results they want.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, having been, on the front end of all this for years, 5 years plus, especially with DFR, but even traditional tactical drone launches, drones need to be on the leading edge. They need to be the tip of the spear. There is definitely a place for them in specialized units, but we've seen internally the statistics of our customers that have drones on a shelf at a station that somebody has to go pick up, or if you're responding to a crime scene at 1 o'clock in the morning, is that drone ready? Are the batteries charged? Is the firmware updated? All that kind of stuff. When it hasn't been touched in say a month or so, that becomes problematic and delays deployment. Whereas when you actually assign it as a piece of equipment, you give the proper training and you put it with really proactive first responders that are not afraid of the technology, your use cases start to just skyrocket, right? There's so many uses in the field where a drone can make a dramatic impact on officer safety, or even just clearing the scene faster or safer. And you lose those opportunities when the drones are not your edge use case. When they're back at the station, it's just one additional thing that's taken up shelf space and is underutilized.
Excellent. Our next slide takes us to kind of our current position on the roadmap on the path to DFR, and that takes us to patrol-led drone as first responder. With the recent release of the Skydio X10, you now have the ability to move from that patrol-led deployment, which is the foundation, and take it one step further to a full DFR solution by patrol-led DFR. With the ability to commandeer and give control of the drone on scene to a pilot in another location, patrol-led DFR provides the ability to scale your program one step further. So as Fritz was mentioning, it used to be that you want to look for the people that are willing to be pilots, that want to be expert pilots at what they do, to putting them in patrol cars, and now just saying you just need to get it to the scene and someone else can take over from there. Once the officer arrives on scene, their only task is really just to power on the drone and put it in a location ready for launch. They certainly can, but they never have to actually touch the controller or spend any time with the drone. And this is all made possible with 5G connectivity. Again, patrol is still carrying drones in their vehicles ready to deploy in any given location, and it basically is making the patrol car a mobile dock. They can inspect the drone and make it ready for launch. And then with a remote pilot in another location, and this could be as simple as a dispatch center or a command center, or it could be as big as a real-time crime center. But it's usually someone that has experience and a deep understanding of patrol response and operations. They can commandeer the drone and the officer on the ground can get back to work with the other ground units. In the next image, on the next slide, you will see that the officer places the drone on the scene, and in this instance, the operations have been taken over by a remote pilot, in this case at a dispatch center or an RTCC. And once it has been commandeered, now this officer is free to get back to work on the ground with the other units, while the remote pilot is the one that provides the real-time aerial intelligence and updates from above. And given that this is kind of our new method of deployment, I know, Fritz, that you've got a lot to say about this, but this kind of gets us one step further to a full DFR solution by giving the ability to pilot to somebody else in a different location.
Yeah, perfectly explained. Yeah, and so let's be clear, obviously this isn't widespread. This may be technically possible, but there's a lot of hurdles, right? There's regulation relief. There's operational integration, getting people to actually do this and see what it looks like in real life. And so that's kind of the purpose of this discussion, kind of the push. We're kind of back when thinking up DFR, writing up the safety case, and selling it to Vern and the chief and saying this is something we can do, but none of the tools were in place, right? So that's where we're at now. This may be technologically possible. The new Skydio X10 with the 5G connectivity, the ability to fly in obstacle-rich environments, the ease of use, those things really start to say, hey, we could actually do this. We've got a regulation team with a vision on how to make how to make this possible through FAA permissions and shielded operations, and learning what we learned through the building on what we learned through the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver and the first responder BVLOS. I don't think this is that far off from being everyday operations. And a lot of people will say, well, let's just jump right to dock-based solutions. Well, the dock is key, but the dock isn't everything to DFR. There's a lot of work to be done. And I would say that the biggest, most important component of DFR is agencies actually staffing and equipping that DFR pilot, that remote pilot who's sitting there ready to fly at a moment's notice. That unlocks all kinds of stuff, including DFR. And patrol-led DFR enables that, immediately. Agencies that could never envision, they'd be so big they could never cover their large agency with docks, or maybe the docks aren't ready yet, but they can have a lot of work for these remote pilots to be doing right away. You probably saw in the Ascend roll out a demo where Deepu John drops a drone down and it's remotely flown to a transient with a knife. And it just really showed a picture of how an officer who didn't have cover instantly can have cover and be in a position of advantage with tools, safely approach dangerous situations, and just make it that much more scalable. And then immediately be on the other side of the county, helping another officer on some other call, like a traffic stop or a lost child. All these type of calls typically aren't the kind that you call out a drone team for. And the analogy I would use is the Uber, Lyft versus taxi. Before anybody understood what Uber, Lyft was, it's, hey, we got this new technology, it's going to change the world. What is it? Oh, it's you pay a guy to drive you around. And they're like, okay, that's not transformational. But when you see it in reality and how much easier it is and how ubiquitous it becomes and all the tools that are needed, then you realize how it changes the world. And when you use a taxi once a year and now you're Uber and Lyfting 20 or 30 times a month, so you see how different things are with something that seems just like a slight change, but it becomes transformational.
Yeah, and I would just add what I really like about the newer concept of patrol-led DFR is just the fact you keep your first responders doing first responder stuff versus being drone pilots, right? Like it takes a lot to stay current, with your piloting skills, the operation of the drone, all of those things, are important. But I think what's really, really critical is, I think being a drone pilot, not to be, too harsh on it, is a fairly mundane task, right? Like a lot of people can do that, fly a drone, fairly easily. And almost all other first responder tasks are just much higher, orders of magnitude more important than piloting a drone. So the fact that you can actually get that drone out where you need it and then turn that over to a remote teleoperator and get your first responder back on the task at hand, which is focusing on the community and solving that problem with the aided intelligence of this aerial platform, that's massive, right? And so that's what I think is most exciting. And you're spot on, Fritz. Think about, certainly in urban environments, dock-based solutions might be, really, built out features in the future. But think about, rural deputies, right, who don't have access to drones that are close by. Their closest cover might be 30 miles away, rolling code, or 30 minutes away. And having the ability to send up a drone, have it be their eyes operated remotely to give them that additional situational awareness is just going to be transformational. Something a dock-based solution is not really ever going to do.
Yeah, if I could add to the existing analogy out there with Uber and Lyft, a lot of people think the dock is the important element, right? We're not going to do DFR until we have the docks perfected. And that's, I'd say the dock is similar to a self-driving car. Certainly self-driving cars would massively scale Uber and Lyft, right? Make it more affordable, more accessible, more shorter wait times, etc. But you get all the benefit of Uber and Lyft right now, by doing with human drivers. And you get, there's a lot to be done before the self-driving car comes on, right? The application, the changing people's behavior, the pay process, the mapping, all these tools. And really, when the self-driving cars come in, they're just going to layer them into an existing ecosystem. You won't even notice any difference. Sometimes there'll be a driver, sometimes there'll be no driver. And the same with docks. You can do a patrol-led DFR. You've got your remote pilots, staff. They're flying constantly in DFR type missions. And then as docks come available, you just layer them in. And then the DFR pilot, doesn't even realize, am I flying from a dock? Am I flying from a hand-launched drone? It really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that last part, because a lot of the questions I get are, well, if I buy a drone today, is that different than the drone that I need tomorrow for a dock? And the answer is no. You can use the same drones, that you have in patrol-led DFR. You can also have those in docked systems throughout your jurisdiction. Fritz, you mentioned our Ascend patrol-led live demo, and that's a good segue into our next slide, which is a video of that. So again, just to set the scene real quickly before we hit play, this is a live demonstration that we did at the Ascend keynote for the announcement of the Skydio X10 drone, and this was 100% live. Our officer Deepu was in a different location than Fritz, our remote pilot, and he was able to provide intel with Deepu just putting the drone on scene. So we'll go ahead and play that. Hopefully the stream is okay.
Very excited to be here today. As Adam mentioned, prior to Skydio, I was with the Chula Vista Police Department for 27 years. And it was during my time as UAS commander that Cape Termis and I began working on a unique use case for drones in everyday policing. We worked with a great team at Chula Vista PD to go from concept to reality, showing public safety everywhere how to routinely use drones to de-escalate, increase situational awareness, and reduce response times. In fact, today is exactly 5 years to the day that we officially named this concept Drone as First Responder, or DFR, and now DFR is known worldwide as the ultimate public safety drone use case. So I'm very excited to demonstrate how the Skydio team can bring that life-saving capability to your community through patrol-led DFR. Let's begin the live demo now.
Hi Frank, I have a call pending in your area near 223 Halleck. Caller states the female appears disoriented, talking to herself and carrying a knife. Subject is a white female, thin-built, blue shirt, gray pants, black boots. No threats or reports of injuries at this time. Be advised, I don't have any other available units right now.
Hi, Frank. I copy. I saw the call come over on the CAD system. I'm staged about a block south with the Skydio X10. Do we have any DFR pilots available?
DFR1, I'm monitoring. I'm available to assist.
Hi, Frank, the DFR1. You're clear to launch, and show me switching to Axon Body 4 for recording and comms.
DFR1 copies. I have you loud and clear on Axon Respond, and I'm launching now.
Hi, Frank, copy.
And DFR1 got a good feed. And just a heads up, you may have a jogger heading to you right now.
All right, Frank, I see you. DFR1, be advised, we might have a possible underneath the bridge north of us.
Copy that. I'll head that way. I'll start the search now. I'll go down low and look underneath there with the thermal.
Copy. I'm going to clear this parking lot and continue north.
Copy that. And got the thermal on. So far, no heat sources. Appears clear under the bridge. Still looking.
10-4.
And DFR1, I actually might have a possible here. It's under the northeast corner of that building in the crawl space. Appears to match. It's a female. Definitely talking to herself. She actually has a large fixed-bladed knife in her right hand.
10-4.
Just hang there. I think she's keyed in on my drone. Affirm. She sees my drone. She's coming out and still has a knife. Actually, she's putting the knife down now. She's got the knife down now. She's got her hands up, surrendering to the drone. You might be able to reach out and call to her now.
Bye, Frank. I see her. I'm going to call her out to me now. Miss, police department. Come on over this way. You all right? You have any other weapons on you?
And
okay. Keep your hands up. Come towards me.
DFR1. As soon as you can clear code 4, I'm going to have to clear for a nearby missing child.
All right. DFR1, you're clear to disengage. She's requesting to go to the hospital. We're going to be code 4 here. Thank you for the backup.
Copy that, DFR1. Good job. I'm out.
So as you can see, that was our live demo of how kind of we envision patrol-led DFR working out in the field. Fritz, anything you want to add to that as the remote pilot in that demo?
I think it was a really good demonstration. Not only the value of DPU having an instant cover unit, but also the value of all the tools that you need to be useful. The thermal, the 5G connectivity, the ability to avoid objects, to fly low in environments, and it really unlocks something that a traditional Chula Vista DFR doesn't really have, and that's the ability to fly, below the tree line, and then you never would have seen her from high above, hiding under that crawl space or under the bridge. And so there's kind of, an open to new dimension with this type of capability.
Excellent. So I think this is our last slide, but I'll let you both kind of go through these steps to building a drone program. And then Vern, if you want to add in how Axon kind of fits into this whole picture and the integration that we have built there.
Yeah, for sure. As we discussed, the first step with any drone program is, that community support, and put your policies and procedures out there and make them public. And in fact, work with activist groups, find out what they're worried about your drone program, and, when reasonable, put those safeguards in your drone program. So for instance, one thing we said in ours is we will never do proactive patrol with drones. If we're able to say, if you see a Chula Vista PD drone, it is responding to an emergency. It's responding to a 911 call versus, just out there snooping around to see what we can see, right? So that helps allay fears in the community quite a bit. And then, certainly identifying and equipping pilots and remote operations location. I think this covers, both the aspect of traditional drone in a box or DFR launch sites, as well as the patrol-led DFR that we just saw DPU do. And Fritz, you want to cover some of the other points here as well?
Yeah, obviously the giving drones to, the patrol-led deployment. So they're out in the field, across the region, across the shifts pretty broadly, so that there's one nearby within minutes of any incident. And equipping the officers with not only drones that they can fly by themselves, but also that can be remotely flown and that ideally integrate with a dock system. Because there's a lot of ways that you can, start with a dock deployment and replace the drone midair with a drone on site, battery changes, all those things. And so really getting good at not only dock deployment, but field level, ground level operations and how those two work together. So you're going to kind of end up at patrol-led DFR anyway. It just seems easier to stand it up and start there. Obviously the permissions, get the FAA permission from them to be able to do this. Like I said, I don't think it's that far away. We're getting a lot more advanced waivers. They're becoming less difficult to get and they're quicker to get. The FAA is starting to see the value of drones and starting to take into consideration not only the air risk, which has proven, thankfully, knock on wood, to be minimal, but they understand that there's also community risk. And so responsible public safety agencies, when they're making a choice of the risk to flying a drone to the risk of not having a drone, it's easily outweighed by enabling drones. And then, of course, train your officers. And this is all being done at the same time. And I wouldn't give up on that smaller tactical team, the one that agencies typically start with. You're still going to need specialized drone pilots that fly in very complex environments that do have different payloads and sensors. You're still going to, just like agencies equip officers with rifles and active shooter training, doesn't mean they disband their SWAT team. So it's a complementary. So those are the kind of the big 6 steps to start, and partnering with people who understand all the a turnkey solution, I think would be helpful, right? People who make the drones, make the ecosystems, have the partnerships between, like, for example, Skydio and Axon, to really make it more turnkey, right? The regulatory team to unlock the waivers, the training team, and then this ongoing support. People who understand your operations, people who understand what you need in terms of being up and running 24/7, and having the community customer service team and basically the culture to help you.
Yeah, and just speaking on behalf of Axon, that's one of the reasons we partnered with Skydio in terms of, quality, especially now the X10 is amazing. The camera's phenomenal. Our customers who are building UAS programs, one of the things we emphasize is trying to be that turnkey solution, to have all the services already vetted for them, so that if they come to me and say, hey, Vern, I want to build a drone program from scratch, we not only have Skydio as a great partner for equipment, but we have partnerships with training providers. We have the program management. We have partnerships to help you get your COAs and waivers done. We can help you with our customer service managers continue your program and service it. So we really do view ourselves being an end-to-end solution, and Skydio is a really terrific partner within that ecosystem. I always like to emphasize, crewed aviation has been around in law enforcement, for probably 50 plus years, and drones really have really started to become more ubiquitous in the last, 5 years or so, and it's only going to accelerate. But make sure that, we're building professional aviation programs, and that's what the partnership of Axon and Skydio helps you do, is build a professional aviation program so that you can safely fly in the national airspace. If you have an incident at some point in the future, which will occur when you're flying, forever, that you can mitigate it and also just have the safest program possible. And I really think that Skydio helps unlock that with their autonomy and obstacle avoidance.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. We have another slide, or is that it?
Yep, that's it. The last one was just to wrap up with kind of the steps that agencies need to go through, but we will open it up to Q&A now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for a great presentation here, panel. We really appreciate you being here and sharing this great information with us today. Everyone, it is time for the Q&A portion. So if you have questions here for our panel and what we've been talking about, now's the time to send them in. Please send them in using the chat option there that you can see illustrated on the screen there. And panel, let's get right to it here. The first question for you: how are you proposing to address the visual observer requirement to be able to see the radius around the drone? The patrol-based option does not seem to address the need for visual observer.
Yeah, so we're going to take a page from the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver, where there's no VO required based on certain circumstances, based on how high the drone flies, basically using shielded operations as a detect and avoid, right? Staying below manned aircraft, accepting ground risk based on that community risk. And if you're flying under a COA as a public aircraft operations, the flight over people doesn't need to be directly mitigated, but there, of course, Skydio offers a parachute option as well. So yeah, we're admitting that our thought process on this this use case is ahead of the regulations. But I think you can see with the first responder beyond visual line of sight waiver, where you are allowed to have a remote operator as long as you have a VO and a two mile radius around the aircraft. Do you really need that if it's during an emergency operation? You promise to fly, say no further than 200 feet above infrastructure. You get that shielded operations kind of airspace, which is typically not filled with manned aircraft. You have an advanced knowledge of the airspace. You have immediate comms with the remote pilot. You have other mitigations in place. And so, I think crafting a safety case that enables this early on isn't out of the question. And once people see that it can be done safely and the value it can add, I think that it'll go the way of the tactical, where it started with Chula Vista and now that's in 400 plus agencies.
And I'll just piggyback on what Fritz said. When we started 5 years ago with the FAA and DFR and the COAs that we received, none of that existed. We helped the FAA understand the use cases, and we worked closely with them to build out the safety mitigation and those things. So again, is this today? Of course not. But do we see a path for that future? 100%. And that might be in the early stages using one of our partners like Dedrone for airspace awareness and integrating that into the system. So we have the remote pilot has better situational awareness as to crewed aircraft in the area, but it also could have a number of other systems in the future, all automated, which would give remote pilots much more complete airspace awareness as they pilot these drones.
Okay, thank you. Next question here for you, panel. What measures are in place to ensure the safety and security of drones when used in potentially hazardous situations?
So, I mean, obviously speaking for Skydio, the onboard AI and obstacle avoidance technology, the drone that can see the world around it, means that it can fly in obstacle-rich environments. And you kind of have to have a drone that can do that to be able to fly it remotely. Obviously, the remote pilot, is probably in a room somewhere, no idea of what is around the drone, and to fly that comfortably, among the trees and, underneath canopies and underneath bridges, underneath wires, etc. You have to have that onboard capability, and that's really when we, the foundation that Skydio built really is going to unlock this patrol-led DFR. Because when you're a police officer, you roll to the scene, maybe you're third or fourth on a unit, or a third or fourth unit on the scene. You know that the watch commander is going to want a drone overhead, but you're going to take a position on a perimeter or something. You do have time to power up the drone, set it down, and have a remote pilot take control of that, launch it, and fly it. Add to the value of managing the incident. But you can't control that you're not under a tree or not under wires, so you have to have a drone that will do that for you. So that's why I think the Skydio and a lot of the capabilities it has was really starting to paint a picture where like we could really do this.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Other things are being done today to unlock the future, right? Like I already mentioned, Dedrone. We're having real-world tests in Oakland County, Michigan, with docking solutions and Dedrone airspace sensing technology to compare head-to-head against human DOs and pilots versus having the technology do that. And there's going to be a formal report on this done by Virginia Tech, which is one of the FAA's preferred independent evaluators. And so again, I think what Fritz and I, and the purpose of today's webinar is this is both today and the future, that we as former public safety officers, but also influencers within our companies, are trying to unlock new uses for our customers in the future. And having seen our experience with Chula Vista at DFR and where the FAA moved with us on that, we're very confident that these new use cases, these new scenarios, will also be unlocked in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Fritz, this next question sort of ties into what you were talking about a moment ago. And the question is, how do you work around issues in areas where cellular connectivity is unreliable or unavailable, particularly in areas that are remote or rural?
Right, so obviously patrol-led DFR is not going to work without connectivity. So connectivity is a huge component of it, and some communities will have better coverage than others. Some parts of the community will have better connection than others. I mean, connectivity has always been a challenge for DFR, and so I assume it's going to be for patrol-led DFR. I think those problems will go away as 5G becomes more ubiquitous and more cell towers, et cetera. Just like the early days of cell phone, the connectivity wasn't all that great. Obviously, Skydio allows you to fly through, the 2.4 to 5.1 Wi-Fi with extended range up to 7.5 miles in a good environment. Probably less so than that in an urban environment with rich RF, but certainly there's two ways to fly, and I'm sure that moving between those two connections makes a lot of sense, and having that enabled so that you don't lose connection from a controller. If the cell goes out, you still have connectivity. But you'd have to have operational protocols in place that, what happens when you do lose connection? Where does that drone go? Does it come back to the officer? Does it go to a nearby roof? Those are things that have to be figured out in operations. So when people get this, you get those bleeding edge agencies like Chula Vista and others that, will answer those questions with operational protocols, with trial and error, and kind of lay the foundation. And like all cops, we learn, we don't like to reinvent the wheel, we learn from others. And so I think those will crystallize over the next year or two as this becomes technologically and regulation wise possible. And the next step is to get into operations and draw the blueprint for everybody else.
I'll just piggyback and add to that, especially in the rural use cases, is, a lot of our customers use Starlink services to do that. Obviously, that's not something that would necessarily work for patrol-led DFR, but what I would just ask our audience to think about is, who would have thought of thousands of satellites 6 or 8 years ago up there providing Starlink services that can be set up in less than 5 minutes in general, right? And so what that future might look like, especially now with Blue Origin starting their launch sequences for similar services, there could literally be like light bars in the future that have the satellite connectivity, and you're not going to even think twice about it. It'll just be interconnected anywhere that you might be where you can see the sky. So while it's important to think about what you can do today, it's also equally important to utilize the program that you have to build toward the future of what will be, because these things will be coming, and I think they're going to come faster than most of us think about it.
Okay, thank you. All right, panel, next question here for you. For departments at the ground level just starting a drone program, DFR is still a ways off. Where would you point us for resources in establishing a program, general training requirements and recommendations, policy implementation, et cetera?
I think I kind of just said it. We don't like to reinvent the wheel, so just reach out. There's somebody nearby you that has a drone program. Obviously, you can reach out to me or Vern. That's probably much of our day is talking to people who are in various stages of standing up drone programs. Obviously we work for vendors and we'll tell you all of our products, but we're here to help regardless. We just want to enable you. And so there's a lot of resources out there. I would join Drone Responders. It is a huge repository of agencies that share policies, share operational protocols, share safety cases. So again, don't cut and paste, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Reach out, do a regional training program, train with your agency partners. There's probably going to be a lot of overlap anyway. You're probably doing it with other things that you do, with SWAT and other regionalized assets. So I would just ask for help.
Yeah, to piggyback what Fritz says, what I sincerely tell every cop that I talk to, a public safety person, is, I'm a cop first. Yes, I work for Axon and I want you to use Axon products, but I'm always going to tell you the nitty-gritty truth in terms of, what you need to be successful. Because, Fritz and I look at, what we, we're able to accomplish along with Chief Kennedy at Chula Vista, but we also realize there's a lot of agencies out there that really are struggling to keep their drone programs going. And the most important thing is having professional, safe aviation programs out there. And so we will always give you advice. My email is V like Victor, Sallee, SALLEE @axon.com. So feel free to shoot me an email. I'll set up a one-on-one, no obligation, no salesy part. Axon also has a newer document out on kind of how to start and maintain and expand a drone program, soup to nuts. And so you just need to go to axonair.com, take a look there, and there's resources there. There's also resources put out if you want something independent. The COPS office has some good documents on how to build public safety drone programs. So there is a lot out there, and as Fritz mentioned, Drone Responders is a great resource LEDA, Law Enforcement Drone Association, puts on some fantastic training. So there's plenty out there. We're happy to point you in the right direction, give you our advice.
Okay, thank you. Next question, have there been any test cases in municipalities with significant commercial air traffic? So for example, operations around closely spaced aerodomes.
So I mean, I'm going to say yes, but I'm hunting for specific examples. I was just in the DEC area. There's quite a few agencies in the DC area that are pretty experienced in being operational in very restricted and challenging airspace. Fairfax County, I know, has a very advanced drone program. So yeah, and it's like a little bit of a kitchen remodel. It's different for everyone. We were kind of graced in Chula Vista with a lot of G airspace and Mozi Vale, so it made things a lot easier initially. But I don't think difficult airspace is a deal breaker. I think you just basically coordinate with your local FAA, acknowledge it, understand it, and I think you can become operational within it with certain. I know a lot of agencies are reaching out and coordinating with their local air traffic control people, and in Vegas, it had a unique waiver where they got permission to fly in zero grid down the strip. It was a unique partnership that they had developed. So you're only limited by your imagination, and I have not heard of anyone that's been permanently grounded because of the airspace around them.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. If you talk to Mike O'Shea, who's the FAA law enforcement or public safety consultant or liaison, he'll tell you you'll almost never just get a flat no, but it's a process, right? So you have to come up with the CONOPS and the safety use cases and the mitigations, and you can probably get to those complex operations. And we do see those in places that are in pretty tough airspace, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, all of which have airports either in the city or in close proximity, and they're doing full-blown DFR in Southern California. So if you can do it there, you can do it just about anywhere.
Okay, thank you. I've got time for one more quick one here before we wrap up panel. The question is, what kind of latency are you experiencing when you're operating a drone remotely over a 5G network?
Yeah, latency obviously is a big problem historically with connectivity, and you obviously want as little latency as possible. It's super critical in emergency situations because you got to react on a dime, and so that's one of the concerns. I'm having flown remotely through with the Skydio, obviously through 5G. I think the latency is very acceptable, less than a second, but that could vary depending on where you're flying. So one of the advantages of a drone that won't hit things is that latency is not going to drive you into a wall or something because you don't have the time to react. Latency typically is important for navigating through complex environments, and so having a drone that won't hit things for you is helpful. But yeah, I mean, I think latency, connectivity, those are all problems that are going to be with us for a while, and solutions like Bern talked about will help a great deal. And we're kind of dependent on the rest of the world to help us out there.
I'll just add to that. The latency, is very, typically is all under, sub 1 second latency on almost all aspects of things. But I did want to kind of just call out a pretty important Skydio success 2 weeks ago at the Chula Vista DFR conference put on by UAS Norway and Chula Vista PD. We, most of the vendors were having some trouble in a very congested RF environment getting their live streaming going. It was a little bit hit and miss at times, in fact, black screens a couple times. And the Skydio X10 with 5G connectivity had just beautiful live streaming, had no issues whatsoever. And I don't mean to give a pure Skydio pitch on this. It was an honest, like, you guys won the day with 5G, and it is transformational. Great choice to have either your traditional RC control or 5G, depending on what your environment is.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're just about out of time here today for today's webinar, but we want to thank our sponsors, Skydio and Axon, for being here with us. And I also want to thank our fantastic panel for being here with us. Vern, Fritz, and Noreen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, appreciate it.